Now, we are also going to go over this document that is found in your First Things First Getting Started packet. This is page 21 of the First Things First Getting Started packet. It's entitled Tricks of the Trade, but I'd like to go over it at this point with you. These are some commonly used tricks by some of the sleaze balls in the energy business. And now next, I'd like to go over this Tricks of the Trade sheet that you will find in your First Things First packet. It's page 21 of your First Things First packet. And this describes some commonly used tricks that some energy services companies out there in the deregulated marketplaces are using. One of the first tricks is something called an auto-renew contract. Some third-party suppliers in fine print on their contracts will put that if the customer does not notify the third-party supplier within 60 days of the end date on that contract, the contract will auto-renew for 1 year at whatever the current market price is. I'll give you a specific example of this. We recently quoted a customer. It was a small restaurant in Philadelphia, and he signed a 2-year third-party supply agreement in June of 2013. He realized that he was coming off of that 2-year agreement come June of 2015, and he contacted Apollo to go out into the marketplace and shop the best third-party supply rate for him. We found him a rate where we were saving him close to half a penny per kilowatt hour, which doesn't sound like much, but we were saving him a significant amount of money on his utility bills, considering the size of his utility bills. And when we went to help him execute that third-party supply contract, we found out that the previous supplier had auto-renewed him for 1 year. Now, unfortunately, this customer was new to Apollo, and he had not been a current Apollo customer. If he had been an Apollo customer, we would have notified him 6 months before the expiration of his contract. We would have looked if there were any auto-renew clauses in the contract, and we would have made sure that the customer had ample time to prepare and to shop a new third-party supply agreement, rather than just default to an auto-renew contract. In some cases, we're even able to get those auto-renew clauses stricken from the third-party supply agreement. So that's a common trick of the trade that a lot of third-party supply companies are using, and the value that we bring to our customers is by pointing those things out and staying on top of their energy profile, so they're not subject to those terms. And P.S., that small restaurant in Philadelphia was auto-renewed at a much higher rate than we were able to secure for him, and the customer was fairly upset with this third-party supplier because he was paying thousands more per year on his utility bills as a result of that. In addition to the auto-renew contracts, the second trick of the trade is something that we call a bandwidth requirement in a contract. And typically what that means is when a third-party supplier is quoting a commercial user for a new agreement, they will look at their historical usage data in order to quote them accurately. And if a commercial customer used approximately 1 million kilowatt hours in the previous year, that third-party supplier will quote the customer based on an assumption that the customer is going to use the exact same amount of power in the coming year. Some third-party suppliers have something called a bandwidth requirement in their contract that says the customer could not go above 10% of that usage or below 10% of that usage. So in my example with 1 million annual kilowatt hours, the customer would not be able to go above 1.1 annual million kilowatt hours or below 900,000 annual kilowatt hours, or the customer would be penalized and sold a rate at the current market condition. This is something that that a lot of our competition does not even realize, and this is something that customers can really get hurt by if you're not careful. For example, say you have a customer, say you have a manufacturing customer, and they're planning on growing their facility next year, or maybe their manufacturing facility and their energy usage is tied to the contracts they get to manufacture. And maybe they're anticipating to get more contracts this year, and they might have to add a second shift. Well, if that manufacturer used 10 million kilowatt hours last year, and one of our competitors puts them into a new agreement that has a bandwidth clause, that manufacturer could really get hurt if he expands his business or wins new contracts to manufacture. So one thing to keep in mind as a business development manager is to really ask your customers if they have any plans on expanding their facilities or shutting down parts of their facilities in the coming year, because that could affect them and could penalize them when you're selling them a third-party supply contract. In addition to that, sometimes if the customer is big enough, we are able to get those bandwidth requirements taken out of the contract. If you do have a customer that does not know what his anticipated usage will be this year, there are certain third-party energy suppliers that we know of that do not have bandwidth requirements in their contracts. So that's some extra value and some extra knowledge we bring to the table versus our competition. And just in the fact that we know who those third-party energy suppliers are, and we can match our customers up with those third-party suppliers so they're not penalized. In addition, another common trick of the trade is deceptive quoting using gross receipts tax or GRT or other additional taxes. All third-party energy supply rates are subject to a gross receipts tax in Pennsylvania and in many other deregulated states. In New Jersey, they're subject to a sales and use tax of 7%. And when you're quoting a new customer and you're giving them a savings analysis based on a new rate that we're quoting them, it's very important that you're comparing apples to apples. If you're comparing our rate, which is 7 cents per kilowatt hour, not including GRT, to their current rate of 8 cents per kilowatt hour, including GRT, the savings that you're showing the customer would be much more significant than what they would actually realize. And what we found is there are a lot of energy service companies and a lot of our competition out in the marketplace, particularly in deregulated states, that they are using deceptive practices when quoting customers. They're showing the customer's current rate, including GRT, and they're taking the GRT out when they're quoting the customer, so the savings look much more significant. It's very important to explain to the customer that Apollo removes and that we back out all gross receipts tax and all other tax out of the rate. So when we're comparing and we're giving the customer a savings analysis, we're truly comparing apples to apples. And the last but not least is a practice called slamming, and you don't see too much of this anymore. But some energy services companies were enrolling customers without their consent, or they were not checking to see if the customer was currently under agreement before enrolling them into a new supply contract, and the customers were being penalized heavily due to the fact that they were currently under contract. Sometimes you'll find when you're talking to a customer, they won't know the exact end date of their existing contract. It's not really something, your electric bill isn't really something that is on the forefront of your mind every single day when you're flipping pizzas. So if the customer does not know, it's very important to try to obtain a copy of their current third-party supply agreement if they are under contract. That way we can ensure that we are not We are not putting them into a new contract while they're under an existing contract and hurting the customer as a result of a cancellation fee. So these are some of the common tricks of the trade. You can find this document in your First Things First sheet that you were emailed after you executed your agent agreement. And this should help you when talking to the customers and out in the marketplace.